Hey everyone, great to connect with you again today. This Sunday we return to our regular worship schedule and all Sunday morning activities are up and running once again. So worship is at 8:30 and 11 o'clock service will be streamed, and Kids Connect, Youth Sunday School, and Adult Discipleship resume at 9:45. This Sunday I'm beginning a brief series of sermons on metaphors of the church. This week's sermon is from Matthew 9. One of the books I read this past year was Terry Glaspie's 75 Masterpieces That Every Christian Should Know. The fascinating stories behind great works of art, literature, music, and film. In this intriguing volume, Glaspie highlights paintings in the Roman catacombs, Gregorian chants, cathedrals, frescoes, icons, woodcuts, hymns, paintings, oratorios, poems, novels, short stories, dramas, films, and music recordings. The masterpieces range from Dante to Rublev, from Michelangelo and Luther to Isaac Watts and Tissot, from Bach, Handel, and Dostoevsky to George MacDonald, Emily Dickinson, and Mahalia Jackson, from Graham Greene, John Coltrane, and Solzhenitsyn to Johnny Cash, Larry Norman, and Makoto Fujimura. It's a fascinating book that expanded my horizons in numerous directions. I recommend it to you. One chapter focuses on the 17th century artist Caravaggio, and particularly his painting, The Incredulity of St. Thomas. In his background information about Caravaggio, Glaspie writes this: Caravaggio's unique approach to his art often caused him to be misunderstood, and in some cases, his paintings were rejected by those who had commissioned them. To paint holy moments of the sacred story with all the dirt and grime of real life was seen by some as vulgar and blasphemous. They expected the traditional pieties of sacred art, but instead he gave them depictions of reality that were not idealized or prettified. His innovation was to paint things as they actually looked. The great events Caravaggio depicts seem like events that took place in the real world we all experience, not something that occurred in an idealized spiritual realm. In Caravaggio's paintings, God invades the real world, and it is often a messy and untidy business. His art reminds us that these miracles had transpired neither in primary colors nor in brilliantly hued paintings of sanitized saints and celestial fireworks, but in dusty streets and dark rooms, much like the streets and rooms in which they lived. Caravaggio's art reminds us that God reveals himself and works in real life. We're not just on a journey that's spiritual and otherworldly. It's every bit as much an all of life on this earth journey as well. Following Jesus is not so much a reward that we will one day receive when we escape this world, but it's welcoming him in every moment of our earthly lives. We tend to view things like worship as something separated from everyday life, but it's not. Worship, even when it's worship we do in a place and at a time that is distinctly unique from everyday life, is always intended to be an act, a moment that is directly connected to everyday life. We're tempted, like the ancient Greeks, to send the subtle message that spirit is good and matter is evil. We inadvertently then declare that God is not just uninterested in the material world, but God actually dislikes it. But that ignores the fact that God creates the world and he calls it very good. And yes, the world God created has become corrupted and broken. But at the heart of our faith is the realization that God's solution to the sin and evil and brokenness of his world is not to abandon it, but to enter into it. This is the heart of everything we believe about Jesus, his birth, life, death, resurrection, ascension, and reappearing. And Jesus doesn't do all of this as a spirit trying to avoid being contaminated by the vulgarity and ugliness of our world. He does it by getting right down into the middle of it. And his coming in human flesh, his life lived as a fully human person, his actual physical death, his actual physical resurrection, his actual ascension, and his physical reappearing are not done to affirm the brokenness of our world, but to redeem it, to restore it, to transform it, to set it free, to bring again the shalom God intends from the beginning. Surely, this is something of why John writes of Jesus, the Word became flesh and dwelt, lived, or some translations have pitched his tent among us, right where we are. So to paraphrase Glaspie, God's work not only took place, but also takes place, not in sanitized, prettified places, but in dusty streets and dark rooms of everyday life, your life, my life, all of our lives. And that is a reason to give thanks. Father, thank you that following you is all of life all the time, because you have entered into all of life all the time. Give us grace to open our hearts to you in every moment about everything, that we might become more like you. Amen. Thanks again for joining me. Have a wonderful day.